Okay. Let's see. So like she said, I'm going to be talking about storytelling with comics today. And we'll discuss how we can use storytelling with comic strips to better communicate our research findings. So to start out, my name is Nicole Hunt. I'm a user experience researcher at JB Hunt, like she mentioned. I do a lot of my UX research with enterprise products. Again, it's in like a tech setting. I have a bachelor's degree in anthropology. I live in Arizona, and a fun fact about me is that before I worked in the UX research field, I ran a maternal health nonprofit. So I'd like to know from everyone here today, if you could put in the chat, what role are you in and what industry are you in? That would be helpful for me to kind of get an idea about what kind of people we have here today. We have financial services for one. And just wanted to check here. Are you guys seeing my presentation okay?
I can see it. Yeah.
What was that, Courtney?
I can see it. Looks good.
Okay, great. Entertainment marketing, that's cool. Okay, cool. Awesome. We have a variety of people here today. So I'm sure that for anyone who's not a dedicated UX researcher, that these will still be relevant regardless of whatever field you're in. So I'm excited to have y'all here today. Okay, so I'm a UX researcher. And at work, I like to use comics. I use them with a couple different audiences, and I've seen some good results doing that so far. This is one comic that I've used at work. Obviously, the details are changed, but we'll dig into it a little bit more later. So no need to like squint and read it right now, but we're going to pick it apart as we go along today. So the people that I usually use my comic strips with at work is large product teams who aren't directly involved with my research. They may not be familiar with the products or the project. Well, they're familiar with the product, but they're not familiar with the projects that I'm doing. I also use it when I'm presenting to large groups of UX designers, especially those groups who don't work on my product directly and may be unaware of my research projects. I also use it with executives, especially executives that I know are very visual people and really appreciate visual presentations. Every time I use comics when I'm presenting, I always get positive feedback. People tell me that they're engaging, that it's easy to understand the information in them, and that they're fun. So some bonus points there for having it be fun as well. Okay, so today we're going to talk about some common research report pain points that I see, specifically in the UX field, but I'm sure that this will translate across the board. And we'll talk a little bit about how comics can address those, and then we'll dive into storytelling and then getting started with comics. And if you have questions throughout here, we'll pause a couple of times in the presentation and answer those. So feel free to put those in the chat or in the Q&A section. Okay, so one of the first pain points I see here is that people don't read your research report. That can be frustrating, obviously. Another pain point I see is that people don't pay attention in meetings where you do present your findings. Maybe you wrangle a bunch of people together and you're still finding that they're not paying attention. There might be too much information for you to cover in a report. And the product team might be pulled in a lot of different directions to focus on your research results and read your report. Stakeholders don't see how research findings are immediately relevant to them. And then stakeholders don't do anything with your research findings. Now, obviously, there's a lot of different ways to tackle these problems, and comics will be one of the things that will support you as you're working through some of these issues. So some of the things that comics can offer is first that they're concise. They can convey a lot of information quickly and in a way that's easy to understand. So that's really great for when you're trying to present stuff to people where it feels like it might be a lot. Comics are great for being concise. Also, they catch people's attention. I don't think we usually read comics at work. It doesn't usually happen, not in a professional setting. So they're novel and eye-catching compared to other mediums like a Word document, for example. So they're also enjoyable to consume, which is great. Comics also are able to convey emotion, which is going to build empathy with the reader, and they're also going to convey info as well. Like I said, they convey a lot of information quickly, and then they also, if we can build empathy with our stakeholder, they're more likely to act on our research findings. So comics can support us as we're doing that. Okay, so we're going to get started with storytelling here, and we're going to talk about how we can translate that into our comics. We need to have that solid storytelling background if we want our comics to have that intended outcome. And we're going to look for a few important facets of storytelling today and talk about how we can apply them. So the first thing we're going to talk about here is some of the common storytelling pitfalls that I see. So these are just common things that I've noticed. One of them is when a person's telling a story in a professional setting, they may not be taking the audience's prior knowledge into account. That's going to lead the audience to get confused. And if the audience is confused, the stakeholders aren't going to act on research because they're confused. So we want to make sure we're taking that into account. The next thing is the story jumps all over the place. And when it's not in a chronological order, again, the stakeholders are going to get confused, and we can't expect our stakeholders to act on anything if they are confused. Lastly, the story is not engaging. So when the story is not engaging, our audience is going to have a hard time staying alert. And again, if they don't listen, they won't know what to do with our findings because they weren't listening. Okay, so let's start with the audience prior knowledge here. I'm going to show you a comic here, and from what I've seen in the chat with people in market research and research writers and entertainment marketing, financial services, things like that, this comic is not going to be written for us. Maybe there's some people in hiding out here that didn't put their field in the chat. Maybe it will be written for you and you'll be like, I totally know what this is. But I think for the majority of us, we're not going to be the intended audience for this. So they're not taking our prior knowledge into account in this comic. So let's take a look. Okay, so we have a guy on the left here at a computer. He looks like he's talking. On the top, it says hotel. It's crossed out and it says pet clinic. And then we have guest booking and room crossed out. And it says pet appointment and doctor. And then we have a guy on the right that looks confused. And I'm kind of in the same place as the guy on the right. I don't really know what's going on here. I can make some guesses. I'm wondering, maybe, are we modeling like a business model for a pet clinic off of a hotel? Are we modeling software off of it? I don't really know exactly what a hotel and a pet clinic have to do. So I'm just kind of guessing, trying to put those together. I don't know who these people are. I don't know why the blue person is confused. I don't know if it's the same reason I'm confused. I don't know what the context or the setting is for this. So this is not intended for us as the audience. Our prior knowledge is not taken into account here. And so we want to avoid having this kind of experience here when we create a comic for our stakeholders. So we want to make sure that we're knowing what they already know, taking that into account, and presenting our findings, our research findings in a comic in a way that's going to start from zero and then build up to make sure that they know what's going on. So some of the questions as you're creating a comic or you're telling a story in general, in a business setting, that you want to take into account and ask yourself are, who's going to see this comic or the story you're telling? What role are they in? What do they already know about the product that you're going to be talking about? It's safe to assume that people don't know much, partially for the reason that people are often context switching all day. You know, maybe some person is in back-to-back meetings. One day they drop into your meeting to get research results from you, and their head's kind of swimming because they've been in all these different meetings all day, and now they're trying to get their head on straight so they can listen to you. If we can kind of start from zero and build up, then that will help make sure that everyone's on the same page. and also help people who are context switching. We want to make sure we're including things like context, information on the product, information on the character and persona. So think back to that comic that we read before where we didn't really know what was going on. Just try and answer all the questions that you have about that pretty much. You also want to ask yourself, what's my goal in sharing this comic? Maybe you're wanting someone to create a solution to a pain point, so you want to highlight that pain point in the comic. Maybe you're just trying to showcase the value of your research in general. There could be a lot of situations where you'd want to do that. Those would be some things you want to consider and make sure you're really driving that point home when you're creating that comic. What action do you hope the audience is going to take? Want to keep that in mind. And then also, what is the audience trying to get out of the comic? An executive might just want an executive summary of your project, and so you're going to put that in there. Maybe a UX person or like a designer on a different product, you're going to do a high-level summary because they don't really know anything about it. Maybe they just want to get familiar with what your research is. So those are some things to keep in mind as you're creating your comic here. So let's look at an example. This is the comic I briefly showed at the beginning, and we're going to start to pick it apart now. So we're going to go through and read it together. I made this comic for UX designers who didn't know anything about my product. My goal was to share my research findings with them in case it was relevant to their products. And then also they wanted they were there viewing it just to get greater knowledge about my product in general. Okay, so this is made up. Obviously, gift card software is probably not a real piece of software, but that's what we're going with today. So our person here says, hi, I work for Target. I need to order 1 million gift cards and I need them ordered within the next 3 days. I've reached out to a competitor and you, Gift Card Ordering Inc. Can you give me a quote? Hey there, I work in the million plus department where we handle large orders, among other things. I'm happy to help. Alrighty, time to work on the Target account. I also need to get started on large orders from different accounts. I use gift card software to place these large orders because our website doesn't allow for large orders. Okay, so he goes from happy to neutral to frustrated. And now he's frowning. Hey, Research Riley, I have a few things going on here that are making my job a little harder than it needs to be. I guess I can keep doing them, but it seems unnecessary. And then our UX researcher here on the right says, I'd love to hear about them. The product team actually sent me to come talk to you. We heard you're having to open tons of different screens to get your job done. And we want to create something that's going to make accessing your tasks easier. Can you show me what's going on? Okay, so that's our comic there. Hopefully we saw that you were able to follow along with that because I assumed no one knew anything about this product when I was creating this. So hopefully all of us were able to follow along as we were doing that. You'll see here also that it was pretty simple. We were pretty straightforward with everything we talked about. When in doubt, when you're writing a comic, simplify it. I only touched on one example of that is I only touched on one thing that this piece of software did. It probably does all these other cool things, but I only talked about the one thing that was relevant because my purpose was just to highlight one pain point here. And the images can also help convey what we're trying to talk about. For example, this really drove home some of the frustration that was going on with this user. Okay, so the next thing we want to talk about is chronological storytelling. That's going to be helpful when we're creating our comics. Okay, so we're going to look at an example here of a comic. So first, we have a thief that's getting shot in the back. Okay, we have a thief that's now shooting his gun. He somehow picked it up off the ground. And then now he's asking for money, and the bear is standing up now. And now he's just pointing his gun, and the bear is surprised. So this comic, we kind of get the main points. There's some sort of stick up happening. The thief gets shot at some point, and he also shoots his gun. So it's a stick up. That's kind of what we get from this. But this one was actually, I put it in here out of order. So let's put the frames in the correct order now and see what kind of difference that's going to make for us. Okay, so on the top left, we have the bear's surprise, and we have our thief pointing a gun. Top right, he's asking for money. The bottom left, the thief shoots his gun and it goes through the frame and shoots himself in the back. Like, okay, that's actually pretty funny, pretty cute. He accidentally shoots himself. Okay. So this is the order that the comic strip was designed to be in. And the order is so important in this that they even numbered each frame to make sure that we're reading it in the right order. Helps us not get lost in the story. We'll also notice that when it wasn't chronological, we kind of got the gist of it. We kind of had a high level overview, but we missed some important parts of the story when it was out of order. So we want to make sure that whenever we're telling our stories with comics, that we're going in a chronological order. That's going to really help our audience. So there is such a thing as a non-chronological narrative, but I don't recommend using that when it comes to research reports. So just stick with chronological. I can see this play out in research reports sometimes where they feel like they're bouncing all over the place. And as an audience member, it can be very like discombobulating and you're just trying to follow along. And we're really wanting to make sure that we can smooth that out for our audience. And what's great is that comics are sequential images. So they lend themselves to creating a chronological story just by the nature of what comics are. So if we ever want to create something chronological, putting it into a comic strip is going to kind of aid us in doing that. Okay. So the way that I structure most of my comics to make sure that they're chronological is first, I'm going to start off with a brief introduction of the character or persona. That's kind of a nice thing we can do is if your company uses personas, you can plop that persona into your comic strip and use that as your character. Then I'm going to briefly introduce the product. If you remember back to our last, when we picked through that comic that I had written, it was a very brief introduction of what that product did. Then we're going to state the situation or the user's goal. We're going to illustrate the pain point. And then we're going to end with a call to action so that our audience is going to know what we want them to do with it. So an early American comic artist named Will Eisner, he coined the term sequential art for comic strips, saying that comics are sequential art. We have been using sequential art for a super long time as human beings, all the way back to cave drawings, to hieroglyphics. This is the way that humans have been telling stories for a really long time, and it helps us understand stories. And ensuring that our stories are sequential in nature and using art to support that sequential storytelling, that can really help us tap into our long history of understanding narratives with art with them. So let's look at this comic here that we had picked apart. So we have our second frame here, middle top. That's when we introduced our persona, just very briefly. The next one, we introduced both the product and the user's goal. And then we illustrated the pain point. And then we had a call to action at the end. My call to action in this was that I wanted to go into some additional detail with my audience. I wanted to share some videos and things like that that would illustrate some more details about the pain point. So that's an example of how we can put chronological storytelling into action with comics. Okay, our last storytelling thing we're going to touch on is engaging storytelling. So we're actually going to watch a video here.
Don't move.
Please welcome the Emmy Award-winning Here's South Park, Matt Stone, Trey Parker. You think I'm kidding, right?
Oh, shoot, sorry.
Don't move.
Please welcome the Emmy Award-winning Here's South Park, Matt Stone, Trey Parker. You think I'm kidding, right? Hey.
Our whole South Park writers room, one whole wall is one of these. And we've got it split up into 3 acts.
We have different colored markers just like here too. Look.
Yep. We have that.
And I walk around with the markers like this, and we'll go, okay, we do a show about
This
this.
is
Like,
our writers room.
okay, okay, well, somewhere, okay, this would be a funny scene if we had
That's
this.
true.
Each individual scene has to work as a kind of funny sketch. You don't want one scene that's just like, "Well, that's really funny." We found out this really simple rule that maybe you guys have all heard before, but it took us a long time to learn. But we can take these beats, which are basically the beats of your outline. And if the words "and then" belong between those beats, you're basically, you got something pretty cool. What should happen between every beat that you've written down is either the word therefore or but. Right? So what I'm saying is that you come up with an idea and it's like, look, this happens, right? And then this happens. No, it should be this happens, and therefore this happens. But this happens, therefore this happens. And that, as soon as we are able to, and literally sometimes we'll write it out to make sure we're doing it. We'll have our beats and we'll say, okay, this happened, but then this happens, and that affects this, and that does to that, and that's why you get a show that feels like, okay, this to that, to this to that, but this is the complication to that. And there's so many scripts we read from new writers and things that we see.
I see movies.
And
you see movies and you're just watching. It's like this happened, and then this happens, and then this happens. That's when you're in a movie. Well, what the fuck am I watching this movie for? And just like this happened, and then this happened, and this happened. That's not a movie, you know. That's not a story. Like Trey said, it's those two, but because therefore that gives you the causation between each beat, and that makes that's a story.
Okay, so those were the writers of South Park there. A lot of people find them to be fantastic writers. So their kind of tip for making sure storytelling is engaging is making sure that we're using therefore, but therefore, blank affects blank, things like that. So when we're creating our comics, we want to make sure that there's something in there like that. So we're gonna read a comic here as an example, and we're gonna see how it flows. Ah, what a beautiful day. Good morning, Foofer Kitty. And now it's raining. So here, there wasn't too much of a point to that. We had and thens in between that, which our writers at South Park said that wasn't, we want to avoid that. Now this is chronological, like we had talked about, but it doesn't seem like there's a point to it. So let's read it the way, let's go ahead and add in the frame that I took out there. This is kind of our therefore frame. Okay. Ah, what a beautiful day. Good morning, Foofer Kitty. Hi, Fran. Have you figured out the long-term trajectory of your career yet? And then it's raining. So here, that's kind of our therefore moment, is when that kitty on the bottom left is asking about his career trajectory. So we want to make sure that we have a therefore thing that happens in our comic strips to make sure they're engaging. A lot of times that therefore is going to be a combination of the user's goal and the user's pain point. And we're going to present that with both facts and users' emotions. And the visuals of the comic are going to help us communicate that pain point effectively. So in this comic, the therefore moment was when he started working on, started using the software, and then we saw him trying to accomplish his goal and failing and getting frustrated. So that was our therefore moment. So if you can just present if we're using that chronological format that I had given you before, and we're illustrating a pain point, we're going to see that therefore get smushed into your comic pretty naturally. Okay, so let's go ahead and pause here. What kind of questions do you guys have about the storytelling things we've talked about so far? Go ahead and put those in the chat or the Q&A section if you have any. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions come in. We'll have time for questions later. So as they come in, if you think of any, go ahead and just put those down and we'll touch on them. Okay, so we're going to move on to comic basics now. So the big tips I have when you're writing comic is to focus on only 1 to 2 pain points. If you go more than that, it's going to start getting super detailed and a little bit too much information. Since comics are so compact with information. If we put too many pain points in there, it's going to start just be kind of overwhelming to our audience. And we want to be very to the point when we're creating these comics. The other one is to use a specific tool when you're creating your comic. So this is the comic I had shown before. And the great news about this is that I did not create this from scratch. I have a drag and drop tool I'm going to show you guys so that you don't have to start from scratch. You don't have to be an artist to do any of this. You don't have to be a designer yourself. It's just a drag and drop tool. The other thing is I only talked about one main pain point here. And I highlighted that here and then at the end, let them know we were going to go into more detail. Okay, so let's look at this tool. So this is, if you visit this website here on the top, this is the link here to get to this tool. I highly recommend using it. The big thing you're going to get out of it is this download file. And in that download file, you're going to get a bunch of drag and drop pieces, and you can drag and drop them to create scenes like here on the right. You can also put your own designs into the product, into your comic strip to make it more real. And if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, they even have some resources here. So if you really want to dig into comic strip making, they have books and blogs, things like that, that you can use to make your comic working a little bit more mature. So let's look at the file itself that you're going to download. We'll scroll all the way to the top up here. Your top 3 slides are just going to be examples of things that you can do with the comic strip, with the drag and drop pieces here. Lots of examples here. And then the best part of this is the element library. So these are all the drag and drop pieces. So here's a laptop that you can drag and drop. There's also other devices, like we see a camera, a tablet, a phone, so that we can, whatever your product is on, you can use that for it. And then we also have different arms in different positions, so you can put your character into the position you want. And we have all these different types of bodies facing different ways, doing different things, different colors. We also have, again, all of these stuff is drag and drop here. So we also have different faces with different hairdos, different colors as well. And then we have drag and drop faces as well, ranging from like neutral to angry. And on the bottom right, we also have things you can put on top of the head of somebody to really emphasize what kind of emotion is going on with them. We have talk bubbles here, and then we also have different settings. So wherever your event is happening, wherever you conducted that research, wherever your users do that thing, we can put them in that situation. And then at the end here, we have some example scenes of putting all of those things together. And again, it's just all drag and drop, so you can put it into whatever setting that you want. Yeah, you have a couple examples here at the end. I highly recommend using something like this. I've tried other comic making tools, and this is the easiest one, especially because since I work in tech, I wind up using, I wind up needing the things that they already have in here since it's designed for UX. Okay, so some of the applications with comics that we've talked about so far, and a couple things maybe I haven't mentioned yet are first, I have used comics just to introduce a product and a persona to a group that isn't familiar with my product. And then I'll share research findings afterwards. So I'll kind of make sure, get everyone on the same page. I often like to use comics, whatever the difficult thing is that I am trying to convey. I'll put that into a comic, because if I can put it into a comic, anyone's going to be able to understand it. I'll show it, I'll use it when I'm presenting it to designers who are unfamiliar with my product. I especially like using it with designers because they're visual people. And so when I put my findings into a visual format like that, that really works for them. I also use it to present case studies to UX leadership that aren't familiar with my product. I also use it to present to non-UX people to showcase the value of UX and also just show what UX research has the ability to do. Sometimes I like doing that with devs, and also I like putting praise from users into a comic strip to send out to devs, because devs don't always get to hear positive things about the thing that they're working on. So this is a nice way to convey that to them. And then some additional ways to use this is to use this as an executive summary when you're sharing out your research. I haven't used it specifically for that yet, but I know that that would be one application here. So just to wrap up, the things we talked about today, when you're doing your storytelling and comic making, the highlights of what you want to make sure you're doing is make sure your story is chronological, make sure you're factoring in the audience's prior knowledge, make sure your story is naturally including a therefore or a because, and only highlighting 1 to 2 pain points. And in addition, I recommend using this tool here. I did not create that tool, I found it, but I love it, it's great. Okay, so we're gonna pause here for for questions. We're at the end of our time here together. So just let me know what kind of questions you have.
Well, I have a question. Generally, how much time do you spend on a single comic?
That's a great question. So when I first started making comics, I think the first one I ever made took me like 2 hours to figure out how to do everything and make it look the way I want it to look. And now it takes me about 30 minutes because I just reuse the formats that I've already done. So like the one that I showed you, I'll just swap out the text for whatever other situation I'm trying to share. So there is a learning curve, but once you've done it a few times, it only takes about 30 minutes.
Have you ever received anything negative, like any negative comments about it? Like, I'm personally thinking of a former boss who probably would have hated it because it would be too unprofessional or childish.
Right. Yeah. I've never, honestly, I never have. That's one of the reasons I haven't shared it when I one of the things we often do at my company is we'll send out like a formal email with our research findings in it. I haven't put it in that email yet because I'm nervous about that.
Much wider audience.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but in less formal settings, that it's like my go-to thing though. So yeah, I haven't partially because I'm like cautious about that. That makes sense.
It goes back to knowing your audience, right?
Yeah. Okay, someone asked what the price was for that tool. It's free. Tool is totally free. Yeah. Yay. Yes. I tried to find the person who made it, but I had a hard time tracking them down. I was going to give them a shout out here, but if you find them, give them a big thanks for us. Okay. Awesome. Any other questions anybody has? Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. If you guys think of any questions, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or just connect in general. I'd love to connect with y'all. Yeah, thank you, everybody.